Welcome to RajaReads. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'll briefly talk about certain modes of reading or acts of reading, what is involved in it. And we all, whenever we are reading, are practicing some modes of reading. Sometimes we are aware of it, sometimes we are not. So I thought I should go over what constitutes an act of reading and why do so many of us read differently. And this is, of course, based in really sophisticated theories of reading and literary criticism, but I'm not going to delve into that. I will just speak about it in simple but still slightly complex terms. So here is two different modes of reading. So if you think about any act of reading, it involves three elements: the text, the book, the short story, the novel, the mystery novel that you're reading, the author who composed it or read it, and the reader who is reading it. Most of the times when we think about reading and understanding a text, a lot of people just think about, oh, I need to retrieve what the author might have intended or what the characters are doing in the novel, in a short story, and that is what we consider our analysis. A lot of times we don't even want to acknowledge our own engagement in the act of reading, right? So, but basically, if you even think about it in simple terms, an act of reading involves you, the reader, author who wrote the text, and the text that is in your hands, right? All three are important components of acts of reading or an act of reading. Now, depending on what you emphasize in this triangle, right, will change the way you read or the way you construe meanings from a text. So if you believe that author has the absolute right on the meaning of a text or on what a story ought to do, ought to mean, then when you're reading, you're kind of pushing your own feelings aside because you want to see what the author might have intended. And then you're trying to seek that intention. So every hint, every word that an author has used is a hint in asking yourself, oh, this is what Stephen King means when he says this. This is what Yeats means when he says, the second coming. We are trying to privilege what the author might have intended and are trying to retrieve it. That is called close reading of the text. We also call it new criticism in the English departments. Every time you bring up just the text itself and you tell your friend, I don't care who wrote the book, I will evaluate it based on what's in here. What kind of language is used, how suspense is created, how metaphors are used. It has got nothing to do with what was happening in author's life at all, psychologically or historically. You're basically privileging the text. What you are suggesting is that the meaning is totally in the story, in the novel, in the short story that you've picked up, and nothing else is needed to understand it, right? So you are the kind of reader who believes in the absolute truth of the text itself, right? There's nothing wrong with it. And anytime you're reading a text and you're asking yourself, well, why does this poem make me feel like this, right? Or when I read this story, why does it make me think of other stories or other people differently? It could be a popular novel, it could be a classic novel, but anytime you're concerned with your own feeling or your own thinking process or what the text makes you think or believe, then you're focusing on the reader, right? The way you read the text would then completely become different because it would be driven by what you like and not what the author might have privileged or what the story itself is trying to emphasize. You have entered the act of reading. This is what we call in that high theory language, the reader response criticism or reception criticism. So by and large, whenever you read, ask yourself, sometimes just as a way of exercise, who are you privileging? If to you the meaning inscribed in a text is the property of the author and you're trying to retrieve it, then you're privileging the author, right? And maybe then you'll go around and look for authorial intention. You will also look for author's biography, what other works that they might have written in order to understand the short story or the novel or the novella in your hand. If you believe absolutely that all texts, all novels are complete stories in themselves, then you will just go into the story and not worry about the author and yourself. And that's the kind of reading you'll be performing. You'll be focusing more on how language is employed, how suspense is created, right? Most of the times, that is what we call a formalistic kind of reading, because you're looking at, oh, this novel works, and then you say it works because all the pieces fall in together. You must have an idea of a whole in order to see if the pieces fall in together, right? So you're reading formalistically. And then, as I said, if you are opining about a text or about a novel based in your own experience, based in your own understanding of it, then you're doing the reader response criticism. But keep in mind that even when we are responding to a text and making it mean something, we are never really doing it as individuals, right? After all, what I think is a good story, or what I think is good language in a story, I didn't come up with, right, with it. I must have been taught, I must have heard someone else telling me what to look for in a story. Even if I'm feeling differently, it is connected to some other people who might feel the same way. So in so many ways, then when we are privileging our own way of looking at a text, we might be doing it individually, but our individual self, of course, is constructed by the social world in which we live, and the politics of it and everything else plays a role in reading the text. There is never an unmediated or objective reading of any story, because we bring ourselves to it. So these succinctly are three ways or three modes in which we read stories, in which we read novels, in which we read short stories. The good thing about this is that it doesn't have to be classic novels or Shakespeare that you apply this to. You could be reading a Stephen King novel, an Anne Rice novel, or anyone else, and you could still approach it in these different ways. Another important thing that I use in my classes is to ask two questions as we read. As I'm reading the novel or the short story will make me think about things, right? Think about characters in the story. So I can ask myself, why do I think the way I think about this character? And when I do that on the plane of reason, then I am evaluating my own way of looking at characters in the story, but people in the world as well. Maybe it will teach me about my preferences or about my prejudices, right? Similarly, another question that I ask my students to ask is when they're reading a story or a novel as to why does it make me feel this way? A character, or what is happening to a character, if it makes you angry, sad, right? Asking yourself why does it make you feel that way then enables you to trace your own feelings, like map them. And it will tell you, okay, when someone is being hurt, I feel bad about them. That means I care about other people. Or if I don't feel bad about it, why? Why not, right? That is how reading then, instead of just being pleasurable, or instead of just being informative, can also help us decipher our feelings, our prejudices, our preferences, and can make us into better human beings, right? So that's all I had to say in very non-technical terms, that the three modes of reading that I just talked about are related to the author, the text, and you, the reader. Depending on which one you emphasize, your mode of reading will shift. Sometimes we use all three, sometimes we focus on one or two. So try this when you read your next book. Ask yourself, what are you privileging, the text, the author, or yourself? And if you're doing that, how does the meaning shift? If you have any ideas you would like to share, any thoughts on the topic, please post them in the comments. I'll be very happy to respond to them. Thank you so much for your time. Take care of each other, and I will now see you next time. Until then, peace and love.